A gute Woche. The Rebbe soll gesund sein began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos Mevorchim. Shabbos Mevorchim, as it simply means that it gives bracha, it gives a blessing to the oncoming month. We're going to enter the month of Shvat this week, and therefore the Shabbos before is called Shabbos Mevorchim when we give bracha to the new month. A little bit more specific, we recite in the text of Shabbos Mevorchim, where we say them bracha, we list 6 things which we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give the bracha into. And we list them, l'toiva v'levracha, l'sasein u'l'simcha, l'yeshua u'l'nechama. This is what we say. Being that these are the 6 things that were arranged in the text of Tefillah, that this is what we should say. So we must say, the Rebbe goes on, that these 6 things, once a person is blessed in all of these 6 things, this covers the entire person. Especially that we conclude the Birchas HaChodesh with the conclusion of the Neymar Amen. And Amen, the Gemara tells us, has a very strong meaning. So this means that we are putting bracha into the new month in these 6 areas which really cover all the needs of a person, and especially when we concluded with the conclusion of saying V'neimar Amen, this puts a final touch to it that we hope that we're praying that all these inyanim we just enlisted should be fulfilled. All inyanim in Torah, the Rebbe goes on, are broken down into Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Soid, which put together the word of Pardes. If we were to look for the inyan of benching the new month, this also can be interpreted in all of these levels. However, if we have a question which one we should discuss first, it is naturally Pshat, because even in the word Pardes, we have the Pei, letter Pei comes first, which stands for Pshat. So Memela, in the realm of Pshat, this is what it means. It simply means, the Pshat Rebbe says, another terminology to reflect the idea of Pshat would be using the expression Hamaisa hu ha'ika. Maisa, act, deed, this is what counts most. And this is the same idea. When we're talking about the bracha going into the new month, we are referring to it as it stands in reality in the level of Pshat. That the bracha should be, and all these 6 inyanim should be a full bracha for the new month which we are about to enter. And while talking this inyan, the Rebbe also tied it in and quoted the Chazal, the famous Chazal, Yogaita u'motzasa tamin, which means that when we are told that when we put effort into something, we will succeed. We put effort into learning Yogaita, we put our effort into it, then u'motzasa, then we will find results. And that is the proper way how one should learn. So the Rebbe referred to something which he mentioned at many occasions. We find a very strange expression here. Expression is Yogata. You will put work into it. You will harave, as the expression goes in Yiddish. And u'motzasa, then you will find. Expression should have been Yogata. You will harave, you will toil. And then V'yodata, then you will know. What is the expression you will find? Finding is usually used in a mitzvah. We know if one walks in the street and finds something, that is when we apply the expression in mitzvah, he found something. What's the pshat, he found something? Gemara tells us, a mitzvah comes behesach hadas. In other words, one didn't plan on it, and there he's walking in the street, and all of a sudden he finds something valuable. What does he have to do? He has to bend down to pick it up. The investment of himself bending down to pick it up is no way in any proportion to the value of the item which he found. The same the Rebbe says, when we put effort into learning, this is what the Chazal mean. Yogaita u'motzasa. Chazal are very accurate with their words. And they do not say Yogaita v'yodata, because it is much more than that. when we haravan something, we put effort into an inyan in Torah, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu blesses us that the results are not only in proportion to the effort which we have invested. The results are by far more. The results are in the sense of a mitzvah. Just like a mitzvah is no way in any comparison to the effort somebody puts in to find a mitzvah. He walks in the street and there he bumps into a mitzvah. All he has to do is bend down to pick it up. The same here when it comes to an inyan and learning. Chazal have promised every Yid, Yagata, if he will put in effort into it, then the results will be to such an extent, by far more than much in a bigger proportion than the effort which he has invested into it. And then the Rebbe came back to the inyan of Shabbos Mevorchim. And the Rebbe says that it's brought in Svarim that being that we have 12 months, every month corresponds to a different Shevet. Beginning from Reuven, which the month of Nisan, now we are entering the month of Shvat. Shvat has a shayches to Shevet Yosef. Shvat Yosef, and then Adar is Binyamin, and then the cycle begins again. What is the inyan of Shevet Yosef? And what meaning does this have to us? In the sense of Hamaisa Hu Ha'ikar again, in the sense of Pshat, the realm of Pshat. In other words, what is required from us to do now that we are entering this month of Shvat? The Rebbe says we find in the Torah that when Yosef was named, the pasuk uses the expression Yosef Hashem li bein acher. Hashem gave me another son. That is the Pashut interpretation of the words. So at many occasions the Rebbe already quoted an interpretation of the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek interprets that what is the whole idea of Yosef? Yosef's inyan is to take one who until now is still in a level of an acher, an outsider, or acher, as we refer to Elisha ben Avuya, who was an acher, who we don't even refer to by his name, somebody, in other words, who is totally far from Yiddishkeit. And the idea is to turn him into a bein, into a son to Hashem. And now that we are entering this month, we are told, what is the obligation of this month? This is the month of Yosef. What is the whole idea of Yosef? Yosef Hashem li bein acher. In other words, what we are to do now is to reach out to those who are still considered achers. And the Rebbe says there are definitely such, because if there would not be no achers anymore, no one that can be defined as an acher, the Mashiach would have came long ago. So being that still we were not fortunate enough to have Mashiach come, so that this is an indication that there are those people in the world who are still considered as an acher. And therefore, what do we have to do now that we have entered this month of Shvat? It is our obligation to reach out to these achers and see to it that there are no more achers, there are no more others, outsiders, but turn them into a bein, to a child of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what the pasuk says: Yosef Hashem li bein acher. In other words, to add on to what does it mean? To take the one who until now was defined as an acher, and we are adding him into the category of a bein, of a child. It should be obvious to all that he is a child to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is what this month is all about. To go a step further, Rebbe says it is brought in the Arizal that there are 12 tzirufim of Shem Havaya. The Shem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which this is the holiest name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in Hebrew it is explained, if we were to take any 4-letter word, we can lay it out in 24 different ways. Compose 4 letters, it can be laid out into 24 different ways. The Shem of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, being that we have the letter Hey here twice, can only be put into 12 different tzirufim. So the Arizal says that every month of the year is a different tziruf of the Shem Havaya. And he goes on and explains that the month of Shvat also has a tziruf, and that deals with a pasuk talking about the concept of Tmura. Tmura is a concept which went on in the Beis HaMikdash regarding exchanging korbanos. In other words, if one was makdish a behema, sanctified a behema, that this behema is going to be brought as a korban. The halacha is, and the Torah tells us, that this is the behema that has to be brought once he already made a kedusha on this specific behema. And the pasuk goes on and uses the expression lo yachlifenu, it cannot be exchanged, v'lo yemirenu, which is another word. In other words, it cannot be exchanged. Once he already designated this behema to bring as a korban, this is the one that has to be brought as a korban. Homer yimirenu v'hoya hu. And the pasuk goes on, usmurasa yiyah kodesh. Should he go and exchange it, then both behemoths are sanctified and both of them have to be brought as a korban. These four words, Homer, Yimirenu, V'hoya Hu, have Yud, K, Vav, K, but in a different composition. Homer begins with a Hey, Yimirenu we have the Yud, V'hoya is again a Vav, Hu again a Hey. So the Arizal says that this pasuk has a shaykhus to the avodah of the month of Shvat. So first of all, the Rebbe raised a tremendous question. We are told that Tmura, as we call it, is not an advisable and it is something which is unwanted. So why did the Arizal have to choose the words which tell us Hamer Yimirenu V'Hayahu? In other words, if he goes and exchanges it, then both of them are sanctified. This idea of exchanging is something which the Torah tells us not to do. The Torah tells us a lav, it's considered one of the lavin of the Torah, that we are not allowed to go ahead and exchange the behemoths. The only thing is the Torah gives us an alternative. I should even call it an alternative. The Torah tells us what should we do when it was done. When it was done, v'hoya hu smurasa yiyah kodesh. So the Arizal goes ahead and finds which are the proper words to put together the Hashem's name, which is a tziruf for Hashem's name, dealing with the month of Shvat. He takes words which obviously talk about an inyan which we should not do. Hamer yimirenu is something which we shouldn't do. We shouldn't go and exchange the behemoths. When the Rebbe raised this question, Rebbe spoke about it in two sichas this afternoon. And while talking about this inyan, the pasuk says, Homer yimerenu v'hoya hu. He will be, he, usmorasai, and the one who you exchanged him for will both be kodesh. The Rebbe pointed out that in Hebrew we have two expressions. There's an expression of hu, and there's an expression of zeh. Zeh we use when we want to pinpoint on something which is very obvious, then we use the expression zeh. When do we use the expression hu? Something which is nister, something which is not seen. Here the Rebbe said, there are many people who try to keep their Yiddishkeit in a way of hu, not in a way of zeh. In other words, they feel that their Yiddishkeit has to be hidden. If we're talking about Ga'oin Yankov, which is the Jewish pride, they feel that the best thing is to hide it. And here the Rebbe referred to an old expression that they look at Yidden, especially there is a Gemara. The Gemara tells us that we should not go ahead and start up with Goyim, lehisgarois be'umois, and therefore they interpret it that a Yid is supposed to have what type of a feeling? A Yid should be in a feeling that he has to dress himself in the skin of a bear, which the Rebbe says a bear is a chayot meya, and go ahead and dance that way in front of Goyim. Now here the Rebbe is referring to old Jewish history. In old Jewish history, read the stories of the Pritzim. A Paritz would usually, his way of torturing a Jew would be that he would force a Jew to get dressed in the skin of a bear and make him dance that way. So here the Rebbe referred to this mentality, this expression, and it's not only an expression, it's a mentality, it's a philosophy which unfortunately is existing within many Yidden. Many Yidden feel that we have to bend before the Goyim. And this the Rebbe elaborated, we know the Rebbe's opinion from many occasions, that this is not the right way how a Yid should feel. A Yid is supposed to feel proud and have the proper pride of the fact that he is a Yid, and not in any way give in to such type of ideas that a Yid is supposed to dance with the skin of a bear, the mayofis, in other words, to praise the Goyim, that the Goyim are great, and Yid should have this complex within him. This is a Golos mentality, a complex feeling that the Goyim are those that we have to look up to, and a Yid is in Golos, and therefore he has to constantly not realize in the greatness of the Yid. Chas v'sholom, it is not so. True, we are in Golos, but at the same time we have to realize that each and every Yid possesses a tremendous amount of pride. And this is the Ga'oin Yankov. Questions for later. The Jewish pride which each and every one of us has within us. And under no way and under any circumstances should we overlook this pride. Should we put away this pride on the side. And talking about the greatness that every single Jew possesses within himself, and regardless of what kind of position he is, here the Rebbe referred to those who think different and criticized it very, very strongly. And therefore, back to the concept of Im Hamer Yimerenu, what is the Avodah of the month of Shvat? Rebbe says, at times we are confronted, we go out and we put on tefillin with a Yid. So when we reach out to this Yid, who as yet may have not put on tefillin in his life, by putting on tefillin with him the first time, we know we accomplished something. We carry him, we get him out of being a karkafta de lo monach tefillin, which means a person who never had tefillin on his head. Shachman is the worst. However, the Rebbe says there are those, the Rebbe used the expression, to'eino heim mevakshim. They are always looking for certain type of arguments, certain type of critics. And they claim, fine, so once we already accomplished that we got the person out of the category of being a karkafta de lo monach tefillin, but what value does it have to go ahead and stop a person in the middle of the street when it's already the second or third time and go ahead and approach him to put on tefillin with him? How do we know what type of position the person is in? Maybe he's not clean physically, his goof is not noki, and there's many other halachas which are required for a person to put on tefillin. How do we know that he's allowed to go ahead now and put on tefillin? Same applies when we go after a Yid and we get him in to make the brach on the Daled Minim, to bench Esrik. Or we go after a Yid and get him into a sukkah, to make a brach in a sukkah. What kind of value does this have? At the time later we lose contact with the person, or we do not pursue the contacts with the person. What kind of value does this one deed in itself have when we go after a Yid and see to it and talk him into do this one mitzvah or another mitzvah or any one of the mitzvahs we're talking about? And here the Rebbe says this is what this pasuk is talking about. V'im hamer yimerenu v'hoyahu. V'hoyu, we find in Gemara many times the expression, the Gemara tells us v'hoyu behaviyason yehei. Wherever the expression v'hoyu is used, it means behaviyason yehei, it will remain that way. It will remain firm that way. And here the Rebbe says the same applies when we go reach out to a Yid. We reach out to Yidden and at times we think, what value does it have, the fact that we're reaching out to him? Yiyah kodesh. Will there be a continuity to it, that the person will become kodesh? We don't know. We don't know. Perhaps. But this is what we are told. We are told what we have to do. Hamer yimirenu. We see a Yid is changing, a Yid is not acting properly. V'hoyahu. We have to reach out to him, and see to it, to chaparayim with him, one mitzvah, another mitzvah. See, get him to bench esrik, get him into a sukkah, get him to put on tefillin, talk to him, see to it that you try and do your best talking to him. Tell him that they are taryag mitzvahs. Chas v'shalom, not to deny the existence of Taryag mitzvahs to a Yid. Don't think that being that you're just introducing the person, you're only going to tell him that there are 612 mitzvahs. Not so. A Yid has to be told right away that there are 613 mitzvahs. What will be the end result? Will the Yid adjust himself and Taki go ahead and fulfill all these mitzvahs, or not? This is not our worry. The hemshech of the pasuk, in other words, the continuation of the pasuk, whether hu yiyah kodesh, this is not in the tziruf of the month's avodah. In other words, this is not what has to be our concern, our worry. Our worry has to be Homer yimirenu v'hoyahu. We have to reach out to the Yid. V'hoya ba'viyosa yehei. True, we are told, and we are told by Chazal at many occasions, that if we reach out to Yidden, sooner or later it'll definitely have an effect. But again, this is not our concern. Our concern is to reach out to the Yid. What will be the end result is not something which has to worry us. Here the Rebbe also spoke about, it's here later in the Farbrengen, about the importance of learning Chassidus. And learning Chassidus in the true sense of really learning Chassidus and understanding Chassidus, because this is the only method through which a Yid can really fulfill the Da'as Elokei Avicha V'avdeu B'leiv Shalom, to really have a knowledge in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And one should really know something about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is really only about the only way to reach to it is through learning Chassidus. Especially in our generations. Here the Rebbe mentioned that just this week we had Chavdala Tevis. Chavdala Tevis is the Yortzeit of the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya. Was it here or later in the Farbrengen? Rebbe used an expression that the Balatanya is not the Indian of Chavdala Tevis is not something which applies only to those who were in Hadich. Hadich is the city where Alter Rebbe, the oil of the Alter Rebbe is in the city of Hadich. It's the city in Russia. Regardless, wherever Yid is, we take with us the teachings of the Alter Rebbe. Especially comes today. Today is the Shabbos after Chavdala Tevis. And as we know that Shabbos elevates the entire week, so Mamela, the day of Chavdala Tevis, which we had in Shabbos. Chavdala Tevis was also already like almost in the days of Erev Shabbos, because Thursday was Chavdala Tevis. Thursday is already considered Erev Shabbos. Ma'ale Shabbata, as the expression in Aramaic would be. So come Shabbos, this day of Chavdala Tevis is also elevated. So Mamela, all of the inyanim of the Alter Rebbe's demands, what Alter Rebbe wanted to spread the inyan of the teachings of Chassidus, comes on the day of Shabbos, the Shabbos that follows Chavdala Tevis. It's an extreme appropriate date to stress all of these inyanim. In the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also spoke a sicha, brief sicha, regarding, so there are people that come to the Farbrengens and come from other cities, come from elsewhere. And this is what the Gemara uses the expression, tiltule gadra. The tiltul, in other words, the traveling, Gemara uses the expression, tiltule gadra is harder than tiltule nasha. It's harder for male to travel than for female. That's what the Gemara says. Rabbi says, but regardless, we see from the Gemara that it's hard for everyone to travel. Especially when it comes Shabbos. Nature of a person is that Shabbos he usually likes to be at home. Even those people who during the week they travel or they're on the outside. However, Shabbos we notice that the nature of a person is that he always arranges that Shabbos he should be home. And here the Rebbe said we see people that leave their homes, whether we're talking about male or female, and come to spend here the Shabbos to be Shabbos at the Farbrengen. The Rebbe says this is something which is extremely praiseworthy, but we must say that being that they're coming here with pure intentions, it will definitely lead to proper results. The fact of davening here, of learning here, of Farbrengen together, all of these inyanim will have a proper impact. And Memela, though, in other words, they've given up on some of their privileges, which are usually priorities by a person of spending at home and so forth, and they've gone through traveling and things which matterize a person and make it very inconvenient on a person. However, the results which these inyanim will bring will definitely be of such that will compensate for the fact that they're not at home and so forth. Later in the Farbrengen, as usual, the Rebbe learned a Rashi in this week's Chazarah. And in Parshas Va'era, which is this morning's Chazarah, the Rebbe said this is a Rashi which he already discussed at a previous occasion. However, the Rebbe says, we learned it once, but he himself is not satisfied with the interpretation he gave at a previous time in this Rashi. The Rebbe says that the Rambam writes that when people will ask him questions on his svarim, he will be extremely thankful to them, and he will appreciate it very much. That's what the Rambam writes, and therefore he's asking people in his generation not to have any hesitation if they want to ask him any questions. And on the contrary, will they prove that he made an error on something, he will definitely be thankful to them because they pointed out his error, they brought it to his attention. So the Rebbe says, no one, me Yidma, who of us can compare to the Rambam. However, the idea the same thought, however, we can derive. The Rebbe says that the fact that he should be asked questions on the inyanim which were discussed in previous Farbrengens, he would definitely appreciate. Especially when they're inyanim which seem to him, the Rebbe says that the way he explained it in the previous Farbrengen is something which is not a sufficient interpretation. The Rebbe says, however, he did not get this question. So perhaps it says that the reason he didn't get the question is maybe there's nobody looking into the sichos. That is why the questions are not found, and that's why they're not raised and brought to his attention. We are talking in Parshas Va'era, in Kapitel Zayin, Pasuk Yud Beis. When Moshe and Aaron came before Pari as emissaries of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they tried to perform certain moifsim, certain nisim, to show that they are the shlichim of Hashem and they are doing things which nobody could do. So what happened was they had a stick. The stick turned into a tanin, to a snake. So Pari immediately reacted. Vayikra gam Pari lachachomim v'lamachashvim, he called his kishif machas. And vayasu gam heim chatum Mitzrayim belateim, came, they were also in a position of doing that. Then the pasuk goes on, vayashlichu ish mateyu, vayiu lisaninim, they all threw down their sticks, and every one stick turned into a tanin, turned into a snake. Vayivla matei Aaron es mateisam, and the stick of Aaron swallowed everyone else's stick. This is what transpired. What does Rashi interpret on the words of Vayivla matei Aaron? Rashi quotes these words: Me'acher shechozar v'nase mato, bola es kolo. Aaron's stick was a snake, right? So the snake turned back into a stick. And that is when it swallowed all the other sticks. It says if we were to look carefully, what has really happened here, obviously, is what we would call a nes b'toich nes, a double miracle. Why a double miracle? At least more than one miracle, definitely. This was a stick. The stick turned into a snake. After it was a snake, it became back a stick, and that is when it swallowed all other sticks. So the fact that it became back a stick is also a miracle. Swallowing the sticks is another miracle. What should we call this? A nes b'toich nes. Rashi does not make any mention of it. And Rashi just passes without stressing the fact that this is a double ness. If we were to look weiter in Chumash, by the Makkah of Barad, where Rashi explains all the details of the Makkah, in Kapitel Tes, the end of the Sedra, Kapitel Tes, Pasuk Chav Dalet, Rashi tells us very clearly that there it was a neis b'toich neis, a double miracle. Ha'eish v'habarad mu'uravin. First was the hail, and the fire and the water usually do not come together. Here they came together. Why did they come together? To fulfill the will of Hashem. So Rashi stresses over there the fact that we had a doubleness. So we see that Rashi does get involved explaining us where we find the neis b'toich neis. Why is it over here where it obviously isn't neis b'toich neis and Rashi does not stress it? This question the Rebbe said he asked many years ago to Farbrengen, and at that time the Rebbe gave an answer. What was his answer? The answer was as follows. The idea of the Parsha here is to stress the miracles which Moshe and Aaron did, the Moifsim or the Makos, the unusual things which they did. Why did they do unusual things? Because by doing these things, they wanted to convince Paroi that Paroi should listen to the message which they have from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and should release the Yidden out of Mitzrayim. This is actually what the whole Seder is going on, telling us various unusual things that took place. Why did it take place? All with the same intention. Paroi, what was his initial reaction? His reaction was, he called his Chartumim, his own people, and he wanted to point out that his own people could also do the same. So therefore, to make an issue of the fact that the stick turned into a snake, and then the snake turned back into a stick, this is something which there is no need to tell us about. Why? Because obviously the Chatumei Mitzrayim, they did the same. They turned their sticks into snakes, and later what happened with their sticks? They came back sticks. They were swallowed by the Matei Aaron, but what were they swallowed as? Sticks, probably. If we look in the Hemshech HaPsukim. So therefore the Rebbe says there's no need for Rashi to make an issue of something which the Chatumei Mitzrayim also did. This is not a nes. So we're only left with this one miracle. What is the one miracle? That Aaron's stick swallowed their sticks. Rebbe says it's really not a sufficient teretz. Why? The Chatumei Mitzrayim were able to do it. But it was something unusual in Mitzrayim as well. There were a select group of people. Paroi himself wasn't able to do it. There was a select group of people who Paroi looked up to, and they were titled the Chatumei Mitzrayim. Obviously, we're referring to a group of people. It wasn't one, it wasn't two. Rabbi says, it seems from the Psukim that if Moshe and Aaron, they came as two, it seems that when Paroi called the Chatumei Mitzrayim, he called a group of people to outnumber Moshe and Aaron. It should be more than Moshe and Aaron. True. But still, it was something which the average Mitzri couldn't do. Even Paroi himself also couldn't do it. So obviously, the fact that the stick became a snake, and later the snake became back a stick, should be given attention to. In other words, Rashi should definitely mention something, the fact that it was a snake, and the snake turned back into a stick. Furthermore, let us understand something else. Why take did the snake have to become back a stick? Why couldn't the snake swallow the other sticks, or the other snakes, as a snake? And we know in human nature, a snake could swallow. The fact it still would be unusual, something unusual would be happening, because one snake cannot swallow 12 other sticks, or a group of other sticks. How many sticks we should be talking about? So we see that the pasuk is madgish, that something had to happen, that the snake should become a snake, should become back a stick. When it became back a stick, that is when it was Belaya. This, the Rebbe says, is very pashut. Why? Because if we were to follow the trend of the Parsha, We already learned in Parashat Shmos that when Moshe came across a snake, a nachash, Moshe knew that to have a confrontation with a nachash is something which does not have a positive meaning. A nachash comes, reminds on lashon hara and other types of things, evil things. In other words, the nachash is something which reminds on no good happenings. Therefore, the nest should happen when the stick is still a nachash. Moshe and Aaron did not even want it should happen that way. Why? Because a nachash is a davar bilti rotzi, as we would use the explanation, an unwanted, something which does not bring out anything positive. The Rambam says furthermore, the word tanin, the child already had in Chumash. We had in Pashas Bereshis. We had the Taninim Hagdolah. Well, how do we teach Taninim over there? Taninim over there, we don't teach snakes. Taninim in Chumash and Bereshis, we teach fish. In other words, normally we would teach a tanin to mean a fish. And that is why in Pasuk Yud, where the Pasuk uses the expression Vayihi Lisanin, Rashi quotes the word Litanin and is meferish, what does tanin mean? Nachash. Because if not for Rashi, we would be in a dilemma. How do we touch the word tanin? The emes is, Rebbe also raised questions, why Taka the Torah uses the word tanin and not nachash? And another question the Rebbe raised, the word tanin is already also in Pasuk Tes. And Rashi waits and does not meferish in Pasuk Tes, only in Pasuk Yud. That is when Rashi comes and is meferish that the word tanin means nachash. But what we see from all this is that in order for it to swallow the other sticks, in order for it to do a nest, Moshe and Aaron did not want it should be in a position of a nachash. On the contrary, let us make an issue of the fact that the nachash became ois nachash and it became back a stick. This the Rebbe says we don't make an issue of. Why? Every makkah was that way. Let us look further in Chumash. We learn about the makkahs. Dam, for example. It was a makkah of dam. The makkah of dam lasted, how long did a makkah last? The makkah lasted for a week's time. And then later it became ois dam. What did it turn back to? It turned back to water. The same thing by all other makkahs. This is like the idea of a makkah. We do not find throughout the psukim that the Torah should make an issue when a makkah finished. The issue we make when the makkah begins. Then what happens? What happens at the end is it comes back to its originality. The same thing here. Something strange happened. Kodesh Baruch Hu told him they should throw the stick. The stick turned into a sani. What happened later? That the tanin became back a stick. This is something which is not given attention to by neither the makkos as well. Therefore, the Torah, the Rashi does not consider this a neis b'toich neis, because this is not an inyan of a neis. Throughout the entire Seder, when we will be learning about all the makkos, we do not look the fact that something comes back to its originality, to its original tether, that we do not consider in this. And the same thing here as well. Ma'acha shechaza v'nase mate bolas kulon. That is why Rashi stresses it. When did he swallow the others? It became back a stick. Because as a snake, it did not want to swallow the others. Once it became back a stick, that is when it swallowed the others. To make an issue of the fact that the snake became a stick, this is something which we do not make an issue of. Just like we do not make an issue of the fact that the blood turned back into water. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted that temporarily it should be something else. Then what happens afterwards? The Rebbe didn't look at Chila that way. The Rebbe look at Chila made that afterwards it should come back to its originality. The water later, which we will learn about, became blood. What happened after 7 days? After 7 days, it's no more blood. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it should come back to its originality, which is water. Here, the Rebbe wanted that temporarily the stick should be turned into a snake. After it being turned into a snake, it completed its mission it becomes back a stick. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also spoke about the Shiurim of Rambam, which we learn daily. And as it's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe discusses something of the Rambam according to the division of learning 3 prakim a day. The Rebbe mentioned 2 inyanim in today's Rambam with an introduction. The Rebbe says that we were to look in Sifrei Hasidus, the Sfarim of the Tzemach Tzedek in particular. We find how he explains every mitzvah, how it has its spiritual interpretation. Ba'avoda b'nefesh ha'adam. In other words, what every mitzvah has a spiritual interpretation, how we can give a chassidische look into every one of the mitzvahs. We find it in the Sefer Derech Mitzvah Sechel from the Tzemach Tzedek, and if we were to look through other Sfarim of the Tzemach Tzedek primarily, it is found in many of his writings how he interprets almost every mitzvah the Rebbe says is interpreted in a ruchnistic interpretation, a spiritual interpretation as well. Regarding the inyanim which are learned in the Rambam of these days in the 3 prakim a day, the Rebbe says we learned the inyan of kinyanim, of a kinyan. In other words, al pi Torah, there's a concept of a person acquiring something. A person gets something. The halacha is dvar Torah mois koinis. Dvar Torah min Torah, when one pays for something, it becomes his. He bought an item from someone else. He paid him for it. It's his. However, the Chachamim have required something which we refer to as mishicha. In other words, when he gets it, he has to pull it, touch it, bring it into his possession. The fact that he gave the money for it is not enough of a kinyan. Why? So the Gemara and the Rambam say that at times it may happen, and it's a very unusual happening. But what may happen is a person will pay for something, however he will still leave it in the reshus of the seller. What will later happen is a fire will break out. A fire will break out. The seller will not feel full responsibility to rescue it because it's not his. So in other words, he will rescue his things before he goes to rescue somebody else's things. So what's going to happen is Gzeira Shema Yoimru Chitecha Nisrefu Ba'aliyah. This is the expression that your chitim, your wheat, which you purchased from me, was burnt in my attic. So because of such type of an occasion, something like this which may happen, the Chachamim made an arrangement. You buy something, if you want it to become yours, you have to, in other words, take it out of the seller's possession, and then it becomes yours. If you leave it by the seller, it's still not yours. So, in case it does get burnt, such type of a case, in other words, then the seller will be responsible for it, because the other one wasn't kinda it yet. It did not become his. Generally, we're talking about Yidden. Yidden are va'ameich kulam tzadikim. All Yidden are considered tzaddikim, are considered honest people, righteous people. So an average Jew, when a fire should break out, and as long as he has an opportunity to go and rescue his friend's things, he will definitely do it. And if we're talking about a person that does not do it, in other words, this is a far chance, because the Rebbe says the average Yid has an interest in helping another Yid. And if here he's forced into such type of a position where he sees the belongings of another Yid burning, he will definitely try to do his best to save that. So we see how the Torah has given consideration to each and every Yid on a far remote case. Because the average Yid, the Rebbe says, will definitely go and rescue somebody else's possession. And if this Yid is not rescuing, still we see that the Torah has given, set up halachas, to bavaron, in other words, to take into consideration such type of Yidden who are not acting properly. Still the Torah set up the rules of purchasing and acquiring things to take care of all types of Yidden. While the Rebbe mentioned this, he quoted Medrash, based on the pasuk, Va'amich kulam tzadikim. There's an interesting Medrash. Medrash ties it into the pasuk Tzadik Tomim. We find by Avraham Avinu. He was whole, complete. What is Pshat Tomim? That he fulfilled the mitzvah of Milah. The Medrash tells us, the Rebbe says, a remarkable thing, that we see Yidden who are lacking the fulfillment of many other mitzvahs. And when it comes to the mitzvah of Milah, they go totally out of their way to see to it that this mitzvah should be fulfilled properly. And here the Rebbe says it's remarkable what we see by Jews behind the Iron Curtain. They literally have to go through sakonas nefashos. They have to sacrifice their lives. to be able to circumcise a child. And still, in as far as fulfilling other mitzvahs, due to the circumstances that they are living in, they may be lacking. Still, at the same time, when it comes to the mitzvah of Milah, they go out all the way on Mesiras Nefesh to circumcise the children. And the Rebbe says, if this is so in those countries, how much more so does it have to be ba'artzois haravacha, the countries where, thank God, there's no interference in as far as learning Torah and being Mekayim mitzvahs, and to the fullest details, and circumcising children, and a lot of types of mitzvahs, that these mitzvahs should definitely be adhered to properly. Another inyan, which is in the Shiurim of Rambam, which the Rebbe mentioned, which has a shaykhis to today's Shiur of Rambam, is in the halachas of purchasing, mekachu memka. It is also discussed the halachas of oina'ah, which means not to fool somebody. And there in halacha, the Rambam brings the halachas to all its details. The Rambam explains how the system of purchasing went on in those days, that one would come to with a coin, and he had to make sure that the coin had a proper value. The Rambam describes how on Friday afternoon, the markets would be very heavy. Why? Because people would do a lot of shopping for Shabbos. So the markets were extremely busy, and you had to be careful when you would exchange coins. They would pay special attention. In other words, though there was a big rush and everybody was rushing for Shabbos to be able to do their purchases, and they had to make sure that they had the right coins and the coins were true and accurate, as the system of purchasing went on in those days. So the Rambam discusses how the attention would be paid on Friday afternoon. So here the Rebbe says, in the spiritual sense, we are now on a level of a Friday afternoon. What does that mean? In other words, we are right before Shabbos. What means Shabbos? The spiritual meaning of Shabbos is the coming of Mashiach. So we now are already in a position that we are on a Friday afternoon. In other words, it is the very, very end before the coming of Mashiach. And just like on Friday afternoon we prepare ourselves for the Shabbos, now we are living in a time when we have to utilize each and every moment to prepare ourselves for the coming of Mashiach. And how do we do this? By fulfilling the lesson which we discussed earlier, by fulfilling the lesson which this month stands for. Yosef Hashem li bein acher. That we reach out to every Yid and see to it that no Yid is left without reaching out to him, and see to it that we bring him into a position, into a category of a bein, of being considered a child. In other words, every Yid is considered a child to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the fact is, by some it is obvious, his acts and deeds show that he's a child of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and by some it is not, as we discussed earlier, the difference between Zeh and Hu. And this is again mentioned, the lesson of this month, what this month demands from us, that the idea of Yosef Hashem li bein acher, to reach out to everyone who is defined as an acher, and see to it that he becomes a bein, in an obvious way to see to it that each and every Yid lives a life as it is befitting for Yidden, as it is proper for Yidden. And by fulfilling this, we will see that nowadays we will come from the Tkufa, from the era of Friday afternoon, we will enter the era of Shabbos, which is through the coming of Mashiach. In Mirza Hashem, next Mitzvah Shabbos that we will gather, it will probably be in 2 weeks from today, Mitzvah Shabbos of Yud Shvat, we will begin at 8:30.